it's really fascinating when you think of Gary Vee's concept, and I kind of wonder if that's specific to really kind of niche industries, because most of the commentary is really about hire slow, fire fast, and I
Mhm.
wonder if from Brandy's perspective on one of the things I was thinking about, what is a holistic leader? Because the holistic life coach, like, what does that entail? Because when you talk about culture, when you talk about values, when you talk about alignment, especially with someone who's coming in as a leader of an organization, how do you ensure that those values of the organization and the individual are aligned?
I love
Because
that. I love that. There's so much there that I can answer. Number one, holistic, we're looking, what does holistic mean? We're looking at the whole package. In layman terms, we're looking at how do we look at everything and see it as a whole versus just tuning into one little thing, picking it apart, and not zooming out enough to see how everything affects everything. So we do want to look at everything as a whole. The second part is I don't know 100% Gary Vee's concept of everything, but Brian, the way that you shared it is pretty much aligned with how I see things moving. However, I believe that the way that we do it is really important to understand. How do we hire, how do we fire, and how do we promote? So when we're looking at how do we create this culture holistically, we do have to look at, number one is, the biggest thing is to get rid of the cancer.
Mhm.
Getting rid of the cancer is a term that I use to talk about three different steps and how do we do that. Getting rid of the cancer is about getting rid of all the toxicity in the environment so we can create a healthy environment that nourishes the people and the organization as a whole. So the first step is to know and show your policies. You have to know what rules has to be followed to supply, operate, and maintain your organization. And that has to do with the health, the reputation, and the safetyness of the colleagues and the organization. That's it as a whole. Now, if you don't have an employee handbook, you have to create one immediately, and you have to understand what are those three things, which has to do with creating this environment. Number one, it has to do with understanding what your policies are, understanding what your rules are, and what your mandates are. And these are three different things. The policies is the guideline set to drive the energy to create a certain environment. The rules are statements that say what must and must not be done. And then the mandates are the commands of the rules. Okay, they're three separate things. The next piece of this is that we want to talk about how we're going to create this environment. And we want to demonstrate that on an ongoing basis. So, one of the problems that I find when I'm working with a lot of different entrepreneurs or small business owners or leaders in in the company, whether it's big or small, is that there's an employee handbook that nobody ever touches. They're like, we saw it when we first were hired, but we don't ever talk about it, we don't ever follow it, we just deal with problems as they go. And that becomes a really huge problem because nobody seems to follow any order that creates the culture that we want, which is all in the handbook. And so we want to create the handbook with great intention. And if we have a handbook and it doesn't seem aligned with where our vision is and our mission for the company, then we want to readjust it, we want to modify it. The second thing is getting in regards to getting rid of cancer is we want to create what I call accountability consciousness, which means we always want to check in with everybody and we want to stay informed with how everybody's doing. We want to check in with people one on one and we want to check in with people as a group. We want to understand, for instance, how is, if let's say Chris and Vince is working together for the first time, I want to check in with both of you in the midday or whenever we can, where I can get in front of both of you at the same time of working together for your first time and say, Chris, it's your first time working with Vince. How is working with Vince for your first time? You're going to respond, and I'm going to go to Vince and be like, Vince, how was your first time working with Chris? And you're going to tell me too. At the end of the day, now when I check in with you one on one, now we already are establishing that I'm checking in with both of you, and this is your time to talk about each other in front of me, and see how you guys feel about each other, right? The second thing is if I can check in with you one-on-one afterwards, it doesn't have to be a 15-minute meeting or a 30-minute meeting or anything longer than that. It could be a really fly-by check-in. Chris, so you had your day working with Vince. How was the rest of your day working with them? And then you're going to respond, and then, okay, great. The next thing that would be great is that I highlight things that are positive about Vince and things positive about you and how you guys can work together. That's planting the seeds of creating a healthy culture. And I'll do the same thing with Vince. I'm like, hey, Vince, how was it working with Chris? And let's just say that Vince said something negative. I can then respond with like, you know what? I totally understand, that can happen sometimes when we have these differences, but let's look at using our differences to benefit each other by learning from each other. So I'd love to learn how you can learn from his differences, and I'd love to see how you can grow from this, because I see a lot of potential in you, and I'd love to see, you guys work well together. So that's a way that we can create accountability. That's how we can create this consciousness of everybody kind of knows what's going on, because we're all involved. And when we are more involved with each other, we work better as a team. And that's what we need to create, is teamwork. The third part about getting rid of the cancer is what I call 3 strikes you're out. 3 strikes you're out. And so this is really, really important, is because we have to understand that what is a problem? First, we have to understand what is a problem, because someone having a bad attitude can scale in many different ways. What defines a bad attitude? Is it that this person didn't smile or gave you a funny look, or did this person actually use volatile language and showed aggressive behavior that makes you feel unsafe? So having a bad attitude, like, we really have to understand the problem must be that a policy, rule, or mandate was broken. That's why when we go to the first thing is like, do you have an employee handbook? Because you got to understand what's okay and what's not okay. So we have to understand what the problem is. Second, we have to look at consequences. How do we follow up with this with breaking this this policy or this rule? And we have to look at the severity of it. Whatever the problem is, we have to have a universal framework of consequence that follows the misconduct. That means there is no favoritism and there's no prejudice, because it follows along for every single person in the organization. And the third thing is that we want to be really considerate in the way that we handle these consequences. We want to have a rule of thumb in the order that we follow it. So, the first thing is to make sure that we have a verbal notice. The second thing is that we have a meeting and a written notice. The third thing is that we have a written notice, a meeting, a written notice, and a suspension. And then the fourth thing is that we have a meeting, written notice, and we let them go. Now, if we always know that these are the 4 steps and we make it apparent to everybody, that's actually going to increase people's work performance and their work ethic, because people get a job because they want to make money. They want to feel like they're contributing to their family, to their livelihood. They want to grow professionally and personally. They want to be part of a community. So people don't want to lose their jobs. And I don't believe that we should just fire people blindly just because we don't feel like they're a good fit. We don't get along with them. We don't like the way they dress. We need to understand that if we understand our vision of success as an organization, then we can create a proper employee handbook, and we can create these rules that helps everybody understand, like, this is what we're all looking towards. This is the vision that I have for everybody. And if we can all be a part of this, then we're going to work well together. But you also have to understand that if we don't work well together, what are the steps of consequences that we take in consideration? And it's also important to know that those 4 steps that I say, it doesn't mean that you have to follow every single step. It just means that that's the severity of if something goes incredibly wrong. So if something is horrible and you can't tolerate it, you don't have to do a verbal warning first. You can just go to, the fourth one, which is to let someone go if it's something you absolutely can't tolerate ever again. So lots to unpack here, but I hope that helps you understand a little bit more of how I view the holistic, taking care of the leadership and the culture.